award. I am actually primarily focused on undergrads, but in my previous life, not that long ago, a couple years ago at Stony Brook University, grad students and postdocs were my jam. So the grad school brought me in to talk to you all. So I'm not your person necessarily. Angel is your person, but I'm making a guest appearance to share some of my wisdom from having worked with graduate students extensively. And also I will talk about a few things that my office does for graduate students, but primarily the graduate school is going to be your point of contact. So now they're all like, I just lost my credibility. They're like, who is this lady? Why is she here? I know things. So anyhow, we have been working on this grant writing skill series. No working. Here we go. Jesse, why is it not moving? Did I mess something up? Is it like even turned on? No. Yay, okay. So our goal with this series is to give you some basic skills in grant writing. So this is for pretty much any graduate student who wants to learn some basic grant/proposal writing principles, any discipline, and I really want to emphasize any citizenship status, right? When we talk about specific funding mechanisms, there are ones that are, typically the ones that are funded in the US government are looking to fund US citizens, right? And it can be a little tricky, but we wanted to do this with the international students in mind. So like I said, any discipline, any citizenship, as long as you're a graduate student and you're interested in those mad skills for grant writing, which we know you are. So here's the schedule of what we're going to be up to. So today we're doing Kickstart Your Funding Search. I'm going to give you some tips on how to efficiently and effectively, hopefully, search for external funding specifically. The next session will be February 13th, and that is going to be research communication and proposal writing. So basically how to talk about your research, because usually with fellowships applications, particularly external ones, and I'm going to go into what that is in a minute, but we're looking at money coming, from outside UTEP, outside the UT system, like national and competitive opportunities. And the pieces of that application are usually going to be a research proposal of some sort where you're talking about your research and why it's important, and then a personal statement where you're talking about yourself and why you're a fit for what that funder is looking for, why you're awesome, and why you're going to change the world with that research of yours, or change your field, let's put it that way. So I'm an art historian, we don't always change the world, we change our field. And then the third one is going to be the art of the personal statement. Jesse, for the future, we should build something in on letters of recommendation. I can build that into one of the other ones. Or if we have time today, I can bring it in. Because that's like the fourth big component, or the third big component you're going to see. You're going to see the research proposal of some sort, personal statement typically, and you'll usually need letters of recommendation. Now they may ask for other stuff, they may ask for a budget, all kinds of other things. We're trying to focus on the basics for right now with this series. So you have the skills to apply to, that basically foundation to apply for most anything. We got a couple of grant writing mini retreats peppered in here. You'll see one on February 20th. February 27th is when we're going to do the art of the personal statement. And personal statements in particular, they vary a lot, even culturally. Like my colleagues in the UK are expecting something very different when they look at a personal statement versus what I'm looking for. So I'm excited for that one. That's kind of my low-key favorite of the three. And then we have two more grant writing mini retreats. We have the March 26th and the April 9th. And we'll send this out as well, so you have access to it. And there will be some incentives for active participation in multiple parts of this, but I will have my colleagues from the graduate school talk about that at the end. I didn't want to distract you with incentives. I wanted to distract you with funding first. So planning is everything. Usually with external awards, you're applying an entire year in advance of when you'd like to have the funding. And that's not even counting the amount of time it takes to prepare the application, right? So students will ask me a lot of times, well, how much time do I need to allot for this? It depends on you, depends on how you work. I do everything last minute. I don't recommend it. But I would say at least give yourself like start to finish a year and a half. Because again, a year of that, you're waiting. You've submitted the application and you're waiting for results. And this is external funding specifically. So I'm talking about funding coming from outside of UTEP, outside the UT system, nationally competitive funding. You'll find some exceptions, but the vast majority of these, you're sitting on it for a year waiting for, or well, okay, you're probably sitting on it 9 months waiting for, so it's like 6 to 9 months, and then the funding would kick in. But like basically a calendar year in advance of when you hope to have the money. Does that make sense? I've explained this like a million times and I still stumble through it a little bit. It takes a long time. So planning is really important. And I think particularly with trying to identify sources of external funding. And so I've got like a little breakdown of the funding types. I probably should have started there, right? Every time I present, I change my slides, but so specifically we're looking at external today. So things that are nationally or internationally competitive. My colleagues from the grad school will give a brief shout out to internal awards at the very end. But we're focused on the top one today. And finding funding is personal, right? You're looking to see if they fund the kind of work you do, and you are the expert on your research. So that's why I want to give you these tools to do an effective search. It's also about you and how you fit, the criteria that the funder has laid out. But it's also, are they a right fit for you? Is this the right funding you need at the right time? And so I have my handy dandy chart, which is not as visible as I would like it to be, but basically it takes you through the stages, as far as what funding you might be looking for and when as a graduate student. So you've got your early training and preparation, while you're still basically taking coursework. And then you've got the research phase where you're working on gathering all the things for your dissertation. And then you'll see awards specifically for dissertation writing as you're starting to finish up. And then we've got postdocs on there too, but we're not going to go there today. So as you're searching, a couple of notes about searching. I was joking with Jesse as everybody was kind of coming in that there is no magic list, right? Everybody wants a magic list. I actually read some comments ahead of time from a session I did, and a student was like, I will be expecting to hear about specific funding mechanisms. And I was like, it depends on your field, right? Everybody, like the kinds of things I'd be applying for as an art historian are very different than a colleague who's in the biomedical sciences. So it's not one size fits all, and it does involve work. Like finding funding takes work. I tell students, look at this almost as like a part-time job. And as graduate students, you're all like, ugh, because you already have a million things to do. But the payoff can be potentially pretty huge. Or you can piece together smaller sources of funding. It doesn't always have to be the big dogs, like the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, or actually, you know what? Let's do a quick discipline check. How many of you are STEM? Ooh, okay, do we have any humanists? Social scientists? What is your field?
It's the PhD program in teaching, learning, and culture.
Okay, so we got education.
Neuroscience.
Neuroscience, okay, cool. So we've got a decentish mix. I don't know if we have any hardcore humanists like myself, but that is helpful to know what you all are looking at. And a lot of times students will say, well, my department, we keep a list of things that people have applied for. Well, then you're all applying for the same 10 things. So there's something to be said for going out and looking. And I know it's not fun. And when I was a graduate student, if somebody tried to tell me to go do this, I'd be like, but you're just gonna have to trust me. It's one of those like, because I said so things, or like, do as I say rather than as I did as a graduate student. And I'm still paying off some of the loans, so trust me. But anyhow, as far as search tools, there's quite a few. Pivot is wildly powerful. This is a database that UTEP has purchased rights to. So we'll go over some screenshots from that really quickly in just a minute. Because the thing about Pivot, at least for me, is it's not super intuitive. I had to bump around a lot, like in there, finding out what worked and what didn't. So I'm gonna try to like jumpstart you all, and we'll go straight to what does work within Pivot. The University of Illinois Fellowship Finder is also amazing. And you may see University of Illinois on there and you're like, I don't go to the University of Illinois. My colleagues there developed it and they want you using it. It's external funding, so students from across the country can use it. In fact, they encourage me to have you use it at any time you need it. And it's pretty helpful because you can drill down as far as like citizenship, where you're at in your graduate career, what you need the funding for. Not as powerful as Pivot, but pretty legit for a quick peek. Pivot's going to be a little bit more of an investment in terms of your time. And then there's the UCLA graduate and postdoctoral funding database, similar to University of Illinois. I don't like that one quite as much, but like more is more when it comes to searching for funding. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because that kind of informs my whole philosophy on using Pivot as well. And don't forget CVs of other researchers and scholars, what kinds of, now sadly, for us humanists, a lot of the awards that were our bread and butter have disappeared, sadly, but like in STEM, you'll probably see, some of the greatest hits, or like maybe somebody's in a specific subfield and you saw something they applied for that pertained to that. So always looking at CVs of other researchers and scholars, good idea. So let's talk about Pivot. So you go into Pivot, into that website, again, we'll send everything out. And this is kind of your landing page. And what you're going to want to do is create a profile on Pivot. Pivot is super cool because we'll go over the advanced search, which is your best bet for identifying funding. You can also flag things. So like I went into Pivot and put art history, and Pivot will occasionally send me awards specifically for art history. Now that's a little hyper specific, but I figured what the heck. So as new things come up, if it fits the criteria that you put into the system, Pivot will send them to you. You can also save opportunities and watch them, like if you need to come back to them. But pretty powerful, pretty exciting. And that's really nerdy of me to call a funding database exciting. The moment it came out of my mouth, I was like, there's just a little more on setting up Pivot. And if you want to, this is super small, we'll work on that. But we use email and password? Because I think you use your university login credentials now.
So when I attempted to use the university login, you have to select your university, and we are not listed. So I believe we use the set, and then it pairs single sign-on. So I believe
Okay.
we as an institution use the email address to create password.
Okay, sneaky. My previous institution used the other one. But when you go in here, right, like when you go in to create the profile, it'll say use institutional login or use email address and create password. It looks like at UTEP we're working with the email address and create password. If you're having trouble with that, you might as well try your institutional credentials and see what happens. And if you have any issues with this, the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs actually manages it, but they could always shoot an email to the grad school and you guys could get them connected to the right people. I'll put the grad school's email address up at the end. And this is where you're gonna create the password, all the things, let them know that you're not a robot, all that good stuff. Okay, and then this is like your dashboard when you go in. And you'll see like tracked opportunities. These are the ones that you're like stalking. The curated opportunities are gonna be the ones where you type in information about yourself and it sends you things. Whoever this is hit it up big, man. They got 30 of them. That's awesome. And then I'm gonna go into the advanced search. So you'll see that right here when you're in the dashboard. Okay, the advanced search is magic. Let's talk about this. Don't put stuff in up here. I circled it to say don't. I should put like a big red X through it. The narrower that you make this up here, the less results you're going to get. So one of my students was sitting with me and he was working on Pivot and he entered in things like biomedical engineering, breast cancer research, like all this super specific stuff that doesn't seem specific to you because it's what you do every day, right? And then he's like, Jen, I only got 2 hits. And I was like, yes, because you typed in mad amounts of things. So like, again, I'm of the philosophy that more is more and then you can whittle it down. I would leave this blank. The rest of these are pretty specific. Now, one thing I did forget to circle is activity location. Activity location is going to be United States no matter what, because that's where you are attending university. So you have, that's another, just trust me. Activity location, you're gonna put United States. Even if you were looking for like a Fulbright to go overseas and do research, you would still put that because that's where you are. You can put in citizenship, whether you're a US citizen or not, super, super helpful. So you're not getting a bunch of stuff that doesn't apply to you. And then down here, they have applicant type. So there's one for like individuals, which is what you are, right? You're not an institution, you're a person. You're not applying. And that's kind of what makes the difference to me between a fellowship and a grant. A grant is probably like your research group or your lab getting funded, whereas a fellowship is like, it's about you. And so you'll see this series tends to focus a lot on fellowships because that's you. Whereas with a grant, you know, you're gonna be pretty reliant on your PI. You should definitely be showing your PI stuff if you're applying for fellowships, but you're driving more of it. Yeah.
What's PI?
Oh, sorry, principal investigator, it's a STEM-ish term, so you're faculty advisor. Yeah, sorry about that. And PI implies that you already have a grant, so that's like, it's a little fancy and annoying. But for some reason, I can't break myself of the habit. And then career stage, there's an option for graduate student or pre-doc, and that's y'all. So yeah, what I would do is I would leave this blank, put in USA for activity location, put in your citizenship, put that you're an individual, put that you're a graduate student, and hit the search button. And if you have a search that gets particularly good results, like if you configure this in a way that's like your sweet spot, you can save the search too, which is awesome. Like you can save the search criteria that you used. Oh, okay, and I already talked about this a little bit. Then you've got your tracked opportunities that are over there and your curated opportunities. Yeah, here we go. I'm still getting used to the UTEP interface. Does anybody have any pivot questions specifically? I mean, it looks sort of easy, right? I think like knowing what to plug into the advanced search is key. And the curated opportunities and the tracked ones and the saving of the searches, that is like the basics of what you're gonna need when you go into pivot. So you're in pivot and you get all this stuff and you're like, oh my God, how do I sift through this? Here's how you start. So I would do like a quick search checklist as you're going through. Do they support the work I do? One of my favorite stories, I had a student, particularly entrepreneurial, okay? He comes into my office and he's like, Jen, check out this award for Buddhist studies. And I'm like, but you don't do Buddhist studies. And he's like, I mean, there's a chapter of my dissertation that's a little bit about Buddhist studies. I was like, okay, that's not what they mean by Buddhist studies. So you want to do a quick check. Do they support the kind of work that you're doing, the kind of research that you're doing? Are you eligible in terms of citizenship, discipline, career stage? Ideally, you know, the databases would have sorted for that, but you always want to double check. The saddest thing is when I see students working away on an application and then they go back and read the detailed eligibility criteria and realize they're not, in fact, eligible for that award. And we can't know all the things, right? Like Pivot has like, you saw that database, like hundreds of thousands of opportunities. So like, no one's gonna have an indexable knowledge of that. Just check, double, triple check. Can you complete the application requirements by the deadline? So there's a faculty member, he and I go around and around about how long it takes to put together a fellowships application. I would say like in an ideal world, you would start maybe 6 months out from, you know, when you'd be making the submission. And then remember the submission is a year out from when you hope to have the funding. And a big part of that year is gonna be you chilling and waiting for results. Because the review process at the national level is intense. You know, they're getting hundreds, sometimes thousands of applicants. I would say worst case scenario, 3 months, you could make it happen. I've seen students do it in less, but I don't recommend it. So you do wanna have like an honest conversation with yourself. Can I complete the requirements by this deadline, realistically? And I'll show you toward the end how to, you know, organize the results of your search and kind of keep track by deadline, prioritize which ones are of the most interest to you, so on and so forth. And will the funding cover what I need when I need it? You know, if you're in your first couple years of graduate school, you're not going to be looking at dissertation writing awards. You're not there yet, right? Or if you're still doing your coursework and you haven't started research on your dissertation, you'd want to look at roughly when you would be starting to do that before applying for research awards. Now, but then again, you're applying a year in advance, so you have to keep that in mind. But this is a time to have, well, probably before you go on pivot, right? A conversation with your advisor about, you know, what your timeline is generally, and it will help you kind of back into the timelines for the different awards. Okay, then you're gonna do your deep dive. And this is the part that folks forget sometimes. So I would go to the individual award foundation or organization's website, look at that full eligibility criteria, look at the about section or the mission statement. This is going to be crucial when you're putting together your application materials. First, it gives you a sense, does your work fit the spirit of the award, right? Like, does it feel like this is what the award is about? Or does it feel like you're trying to shoehorn in your research and make it fit, right? Because for any application, you're going to have to articulate why your research is a fit for their goals. But I think there's sometimes where you're trying so hard to make it fit, like my Buddhist studies example, and it's just not quite fitting. So really, take a look at the about section or the mission statement. Look at the requested application materials. I think that tells you a lot about their priorities. For example, National Science Foundation, their graduate research fellowship, they ask for a 2-page research essay and a 3-page personal statement. So this tells you they are super interested in you as a human, or you as a scientist, or you as a social scientist. And the research, I don't want to say the research is secondary, but there's a very, very keen interest in you and your development as a scientist. So it's just an example. As far as the profiles of previous recipients, my advice on this one is look, don't stare. Because what is going to happen is you're going to start looking, the imposter feelings are going to start nagging at you a little bit, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I didn't do exactly these things. I'm totally out of consideration for this. You're not. I say that really more to look at the kind of projects they funded, as far as the discipline, the focus. It can be really helpful, but I want you to look, not stare. All right, everybody promise me. Something you can also look at, I took it off this list because it's like something that doesn't happen as often as we would probably like it to. Some of the awards will even give some basic information about how applications are reviewed. I keep going back to the NSF, but everything with the NSF is their merit criteria that are intellectual merit and broader impacts, right? And they actually give you a breakdown of what those are. Literally any funding mechanism for the NSF, they're going to be looking at that. So they're giving you a little bit of transparency there. That's kind of nice. A lot of times they're not going to give you that. So I took it off the list because I didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And my pro tip, talk to faculty who've received the award, maybe even peers who've received the award, faculty who've served on review panels. The one thing I would caution is remember their sample size is small, particularly colleagues who've gotten the award. Something I don't particularly enjoy is when you're working with a student on an application, they'll be like, well, I saw someone else's application materials and they did it this other way. One, it might have been 5 years ago and they might have changed the regulations or the trends might have changed, best practices. Two, that's one data point. I learned that that language from a science friend, because art historians don't say that, but that's one data point, right? They know is their experience. So you do want to be a little careful with that. Same kind of goes for faculty who had the awards. It might have been 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But in general, as far as like the types of projects that they fund, the way you might pitch your research, you might be able to glean, some nuggets of wisdom there. And I think in particular, talking to folks who've reviewed for the award recently, very, very helpful because they have many data points because they've seen a lot of different applications. A lot of times, if you're reviewing for something at the national level like this, you're going to have a minimum of like 30 files to look at. So they've seen some stuff. Any questions so far? I get on my roll and I'm just like, bam, bam, bam. Yay funding, yay database. Okay, so here's how I would suggest organizing the results of your massive search. Again, this was a little small, so I apologize, but lead with the deadline. This is a hyperlink to what the award is. Sadly, this is an award for humanities and social sciences that just went the way of the dinosaur. So I should probably change this because it makes me sad every time I look at it. But such is the funding game. The criteria as far as eligibility, because again, I think always important to keep those in mind. And it's got some information about the funding package, stuff like that. This is to me the most important part though, the documents required. Now you're gonna see there's a lot more than just a personal statement, recommendations, and a research essay. It really depends on what you're applying to. This one in particular, there's a lot of moving parts. So what this person's done is they've mapped that all out. And then there's also, this is actually something that's smart. A lot of times they'll ask for a portfolio, like if you're in the arts. And so she put not doing this, but a portfolio. And then what she's done is, so this one, you actually know when they're going to notify, oh no, Okay, she put this in after she got this. This is really cute. This is a grad student who ended up getting that award. Okay, so you probably won't know when they're gonna notice. But what she's done is there's 2 letters of recommendation required, and she's made note of when she let them know. And you wanna give your recommenders at least a month out. Ideally, situations will come up where maybe you're not able to do that, but do your due diligence. And the other thing I'll say about letters of recommendation, first of all, who you select will vary depending on what you're applying for. Sometimes they'll ask for a letter from somebody who has employed you or somebody who's a community member, not-for-profit work that you've done related to your research, something along those lines. So typically you're going to be looking academic. You're going to be looking at people, you're going to want to have your faculty advisor and then other faculty that you've made connections with. But there will be times where they don't necessarily have to be all academic. And so you want to keep that in mind and really follow the cues that are out on the funding organization's website. Something else about reference writers, set them up to be successful. Give them an email that tells them exactly how they're going to make their submission. You need to be looking for an email from the Fulbright student program. The deadline is X, and in some cases, if it requires an institutional competition before the national level, you may even have an internal UTEP deadline. Very rare at the stage that you all are at, but it's been known to happen. And then you also want to, okay, so the last time I gave this presentation, I ended up in a pretty serious debate with somebody who was like, my advisor told me to write the letter and that's okay, right? And I was like, no, it's not okay for 2 reasons. If anybody ever asks you to write your own recommendation letter, it's very slippery in terms of ethics. It is also problematic because y'all don't know how to write a letter of recommendation yet. Most of you have not done this. It's not like you've had the chance to see multiple examples of how to do this. So it's really risky. But what I have found as an antidote to that, give them a bulleted list of what the award is about and why you think you're a fit. So basically, they have their talking points, they just need to plug it into a letter. That's my biggest suggestion. And you should do that no matter what, even if they didn't say, hey, you want to just write this and I'll put some tweaks on it, put some flair on it and sign it. Don't do that, but always give them background on the award, because ideally they're making their letter specific to that award. Number 2, most faculty are used to writing letters for students going to graduate programs. That's probably the number 1 purpose of a recommendation letter that they will have been working on. And so, and they may not be familiar with the award, even things like National Science Foundation, Fulbright, things that are fairly ubiquitous, I tell students, don't assume any knowledge on the part of your letter writer. And then you manage the process. So you're going to keep track of when you initially notified them, but you're going to make sure that you give them a reminder or 2, in that time period. And a lot of times you can monitor what they're up to in the online application portal for the given award. You can see if they've opened it, you can see if it's in progress, and you can see if it's submitted. Some of the systems are not quite that sophisticated, but more and more you can kind of see where they're at and give them a little nudge, or you can always be hey, just checking in, want to see if you have any questions, is there anything I can help with, anything I can provide clarification on. And then what this particular student recommended, she recommended, so she's big on spreadsheets, I'm not, but she did it in a spreadsheet form for the letter writers, the things they needed to know. As far as how they were gonna get the notification, what she needs from them. But you'll notice what's missing here is there's a summary of the award, but there's not a summary of why she fits the criteria. So I would always add that part, make sure you touch a copy of your CV/resume, set them up to be successful. But however you want to organize it for your letter writers, you know them better than I do, right? Find a way to, typically what I tell students is put all the main deeds in the body of the email and then attach your resume or CV. Oh yeah, did I mention planning? Planning is huge. And then I'm going to turn it over before we go to question and answer to my colleagues from the graduate school who are going to talk about the incentives for participating in this program. And then they have some information on their website. We've got some screen caps of that too. The graduate school is lots of resources, right? Like if you want to find out about internal funding, they've got some info on that. If you need support with external funding, real quick, the two areas in which I overlap with graduate students, other than, I guess, so let's say a third area, because now we've got the workshops, right? I oversee the Fulbright Student Program and National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. So if you're applying for those awards as a graduate student, specifically, I'm your person. Anything else, it's the graduate school. And what the Fulbright program is it is funding for an academic year overseas doing research or teaching English. What's going to probably appeal most to graduate students is the research part. Like if you have any reason to do dissertation research abroad, particularly as a PhD student, Fulbright's a really good option. Master's student, because you're only in your program a year or two, so your advisor's not gonna be super stoked about you taking off in the middle of it to go work on your thesis, if a thesis is required. But with the dissertation writing, I have had, in my previous life at another university, I had so many successful applicants from all different fields. So if there's, any reason that you would need to do a more extended bit of research overseas, 4-year degree, Fulbright can be a great option for that. It's funded through the US Department of State. And then the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, that is funding for 3 years of a research-based master's or PhD in STEM. Now, sadly, you do have to be a US citizen for the Fulbright, and you have to be a citizen or permanent resident for the National Science Foundation, but that's where I will overlap with graduate students. Everything else is the grad school, so I'm gonna let them take it away.
I'll let Angel come up and talk about the program we're starting, it's the first semester for it. So we'll talk to you about the steps in it. You actually have really met step 1 already today, but I'll let them take it and we'll talk about some internal funding. Right.
Yes, hello everyone. So if you attend our newest series of grant writing skill series, we're gonna have 3 workshops pertaining to grant writing skills. So if you attend all 3 of those, and then at least 1 grant writing mini retreat, which we'll have as well this semester, throughout the semester, it'll be available to check on MindTracker as well, but of course we'll have them in February, March, and April. And if you meet with me, I'm the Student Success and Fellowships coordinator with the graduate school. If you meet with me and attend those 3 and the grant writing mini retreat, one of them, then you can go ahead and qualify for a gift card, bookstore gift card.
So it's our new thing. So we are trying to encourage folks to seek funding, apply for funding, be successful, but also let us know, right? We know that there are definitely fellowships and things that folks apply for that we don't necessarily know about and don't have an opportunity to assist them with in ways that we can. And so we're starting this new initiative here with the requirements kind of listed out that Angel said. Thank you, Angel. And so we would also have your feedback as we go through the process as our first semester doing it. We tried to make the requirements helpful, but not burdensome, right? There's 3 workshops. We'll be done by mid-end of February with the workshops, right? You're at workshop 1 today. The next one's on your research statements. The third one is on your personal statements. And then we have dedicated writing time in this room that we have through the rest of the semester. So you have a couple of those that you can attend, where you can come in and it's just writing time. We'll be here to provide some assistance during those times. The writing coaches are right outside the room. It's a great location for it, right? We're doing the instructive piece, then we got the writing time piece. Come hang out, bring your drafts. So we give you that time. Set time, just have a conversation with Angel. Let us know how we're going, how we can help you. Just some good conversation, maybe help navigate your funding search process at the beginning. If you go in and chat with them a little bit, they'll check that box, and then you have to submit an application. You do all that. There's a gift card that comes your way and say, hey, you stuck with it, you did all the steps, we want to reward that investment of your time. But the real investment, really the real reward there is a higher quality application, a better chance at that funding. And as we'll keep moving through that, right? And we know that again, as Jen said, that you may be a year out or 6 months out from working on submitting that application. So we'll keep a list of everyone who's attended these workshops, had the conversations. If it's not till next semester in fall, when you submit your application, and you submit it then, you let us know like, hey, I submitted it. We'll get you your gift card, right? So it's all in 1 semester. We'll keep track of that, right? You know, it's not the hugest incentive in the world, but it's definitely nice to be able to go and get yourself a UTEP t-shirt and know that like, hey, that's my funding t-shirt, right?
No, holiday gifts.
Well,
That's what my students board
See,
for,
you
is
can get
holiday.
them for holiday gifts, but like, I like having a like piece of apparel that's like.
No,
no one else
I'm like,
knows.
I'll go get this for other people.
You can do that too. I'm greedy. I get it for myself.
That's every day.
So that is an option for us. We do have our external funding page. I want to make sure that you know this is also, so we have Pivot, we have our research database or funding databases that Jen has talked through with y'all. But we have our external funding page on our website, and it's kind of your first stop for getting additional assistance and connecting with Angel on your search for your funding. So if you go to the graduate school's webpage, right, if you go to my UTEP and search graduate school, you're gonna find our page, and then along the top of the row there is a whole tab on funding. There's several pages there that are really helpful. You're gonna find the page on doctoral tuition remission, on internal funding, on paying for graduate school, and this external funding page. If you can't find Pivot, it's linked right here, right? And so we link it there. There are links to additional awards. There is some information specific for international students seeking funding and some good opportunities there, right? Again, none of it's exhaustive. There is no magic list, but we give you a good head start. And then the two external databases that we talked about, the UCLA database and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign database, those are both linked at the bottom of the page. We also have some CONACYT information for our folks that are Mexican nationals. So there's a lot of good information out there we encourage you to take a look at, right? And another thing, a great way to get directly in contact with Angel so he can assist you with these funding searches and have these conversations. Angel, can you do me a favor? Can you step back by my computer just in case people have questions on the chat? Because I live up front. I noticed that I'm probably not seeing if they have a question in the chat. And again, if you have questions for our folks online, pop those in the chat. Myself, Jen, and Angel, we'll make sure we get those answered for you as we go through. That's the back half of the page. You can see there as actually lists the funds program. We've updated that. One of the things that we relaunched with the grant writing skills series is that we have lessened the requirements to make them a bit more attainable for students. And so we're no longer the funds program, it's the grant writing series. And so that is a little bit out of date. So we'll change it for the next one, but let's give you a preview of like, there's like 7 or 8 meetings you had to have on the previous version. We're like, let's make this much more reasonable for our students knowing how busy you are, right? Attend the instructive sessions, go to a writing, a mini retreat, talk to Angel once, submit it.
You're welcome. No, I went to Jesse like earlier this semester, I was like, bro, it's too hard.
It's too much.
It is work, right? Like finding funding and putting together the applications, but you'll be fine. We can simplify.
And so if you want to get a hold of us, you want to talk to Angel and set up that meeting, have conversations. The easiest one to remember is gradfund@utep.edu, right? That is our general email as a university or the university as a department for answering questions about funding. It goes through grad fund. Angel will be the primary person responding through those emails, but I'll also pop on there occasionally, make sure you're covered on that, but that's the primary one. You can also find his name on our website and you can email him directly. He'll answer those questions too. That's fine, we don't mind that. But we do have kind of almost that vanity email box, just so it's easy to remember grad fund, right? And then we've got Jen Green's information on there as well, which will help you with the NSF or Fulbright areas. And she again is our fabulous guest presenter on these instructive workshops. And so she'll help answer questions and give you some tidbits of information. What I also want to make sure I cover a little bit, because we talked about this earlier in the session, talked a bit on internal funding. And so there are a couple of internal funding mechanisms I think that we have within the graduate school. But most of what we'll be doing is really assisting with the external piece, right? That's what this session is a lot about. Now you can apply the lessons from these workshops to putting together the internal funding proposals for the graduate school. But we do have a couple mechanisms. They're just not as numerous, right? So there are 2 things that you can apply for as a graduate student. Now, if you're a master's student or a doctoral student, you qualify. That is the Dodson Research Grant. And as the name implies, it is about funding your research. And so the master's student can receive it, a doctoral student can receive it, but it's about specific your research project, and it's up to $3,000. We have closed our application for this year and are currently reviewing folks, and will open again next year. If you're hoping that we have a spring application, we normally do, but there were major changes to how the funding is distributed by the university. In the past, funds could roll over from year to year, and so we essentially awarded folks for a full calendar year. And so it allows us to do 2 cycles in a year, right? We would receive our funding from the endowment in the president's office in November. We cycle, and we do a spring application cycle. People had a year each time to do it. They need an extension, they could apply for it, we give it to them. They changed the rules for the endowment. Now it has to be spent within within 1 fiscal year, which means if I collect applications in November and I award people in January, they have until July of that year to spend it. It means I cannot run a spring cycle this year. We're going to change our approach for next year and try to squeeze in 2 cycles. We'll launch it a bit earlier. We'll do some things to get interesting with it. But just know that the Dodson Research Grant does exist for you and is an option for funding your research. And it's a great small grant to help you fund that. And we do get close to $100,000 for student research with the Dodson that we give out at $3,000 increments. I see a question there at the back.
Yeah, what's the full amount that a student receives under the Dodson?
The full amount that they can receive is $3,000. And so you do have to provide an itemized budget of what you expect to spend your research dollars on. And there are some things that we can allow you to purchase and things we will essentially tell you not to request, right? We do not generally approve requests for equipment. And we have a definition of equipment listed in the grant. Anything that is over $300 or 10% of the total value of the grant is considered and is like durable, a durable item. Is considered equipment, and we don't put this back, right? What we want to avoid, and we've had some programs, the rule is there, we've had some programs used in the past, having students submit the Dodson grant to purchase equipment for their PI's lab. It is not a grant to buy a microscope for your PI's lab.
Yeah.
It is a grant to provide you, the student, the materials you need to do your research. Now that can be chemicals or sending things out for testing, things like that. I mean, a lot of data, yep.
You said that the other day, and I liked that a lot.
It's really good stuff. Participant compensation is used, and travel expenses related to research. So our folks in the humanities and like, I need to go to Nepal to conduct some research studies or to look at these different databases or whatnot, or archives. We can fund you travel-based research, right? We cannot fund your research, your travel to a conference to talk about it. That's a different grant. But your research stuff we can cover. So there's a lot of good things you can cover there. We will not buy you the microscope. That is your PI buying it with their lab funds. Question in the back.
Yes, we have an online question from Diana Lopez. Is the Dodson money that is given in advance, or is it through a process of reimbursement?
That's a great question. So essentially what we do in the graduate school, if you are a recipient of the Dodson grant, we provide the funding to your program and then you work with your college's business center to access the funding. And so it really there's no one way that happens. It comes down to essentially how your business center chooses to process that, right? And also the purchase you're making. So there may be certain things where they will provide funding to you and other things, thank you very much. And other things where you'll have to provide receipts and get reimbursement, or they actually just will do the purchase for you through minor mole. There's no one way, and it really depends on what you're spending on. So that is the Dodson. Good opportunity. Keep it in your brain for the future if you're doing research, especially when you're at that phase. The other one we have is the travel grant. That is my funding mechanism specifically for professional development. It is $850 maximum, and it can only be provided as a reimbursement. Now that creates some complications. That means that we can't provide actual money for airfare because that can't be reimbursement, but we can cover a lot of your other costs associated with travel. Your conference attendance, your hotel stay, ground transportation, right? It's a very competitive award though, because the budget for travel is not huge. So no, that's a competitive one. We do that one every fall and every spring. Last internal funding mechanism is doctoral tuition remission. That is not something you apply for. Doctoral tuition remission is for graduate student employees who are employed and meet all the eligibility criteria, and we use employment database to verify that, and then you receive your tuition remission based on your employment status. There's a whole tab explaining that, so I won't go into the nitty gritty on tuition remission. But if you're a current doctoral student, you want to angle towards a graduate student employee position, particularly the RA positions, to get the most out of tuition remission, and make sure you're meeting your criteria. And for our master's student, unfortunately, we do not have a master's assistant remission. And so it's not something that's eligible at this point. But that is our internal funding mechanism. So I said, it's not a lot.
And there's only two things you can apply for. So that's why most of what we cover is really focusing on how do we help you find the right fellowship for you and enable you to have the best shot at receiving that fellowship.
Externally.
Externally.
Externally. They have a lot more money than we do typically.
They sure do.
They sure do. The
And
National Science Foundation is ready.
they want to give you the money.
They wanna give you the money.
Right? And also because you may have to apply multiple times or many things to find the right fit and keep moving through that process, right? So the first application may not be the one that receives the funding you're looking for, right? We have to keep moving through that process. I see too many students that have come to sessions like this in the past. We've talked about, well, I've submitted some fellowship applications in the past. I didn't get funding, and now I'm just discouraged. I don't want to keep applying. Right? To me, that is the wrong approach.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jesse Singleton, because, so some advice that I have heard folks share with graduate students is if it doesn't work out, don't look at it as a reflection of you or your research, right? Now, if you wrote it the night before, it might be a reflection on that. You know, and I think a lot of times as a graduate student, you and your research almost become one, so it's really hard to look at it like that. But you don't know who you're up against. You don't know if that reviewer had a fight with their partner that morning, got stuck in traffic, you know, and then ended up having to argue it out with two other reviewers, right? Like I've reviewed for a couple of nationally competitive awards and it's brutal, you know, and the other thing you want to do is use simple language in your application and don't make them work for anything. Because say they're looking at 70 files, right? They're not gonna be like, oh, is this in reference to that thing that they wrote about in that short answer? So there's things you can do to set yourself up for success. And we'll talk about that when we look at the research essay and the personal statement. But also just do your best to not look at it as a reflection on you. And you'll also find like more and more academics will do these like resume of failure sort of things, like for all the grants I did get, here are like the 50 I applied for that I didn't get. And it's just part of the process. I was talking to, so okay, as a humanist, it's like everything for me is growing orchids. But like I was talking to a STEM faculty member the other day, and he was like, don't worry about it, Jen, we'll just reapply next year. It's all good. Because one of his students hadn't gotten the scholarship they applied for. He's like, we're scientists, it's just what we do. So just kind of getting in that mindset. Now, that being said, one of the first questions I always get, how many of these is it reasonable to work on in a given award cycle? So bear in mind, most external award applications are due in the fall. Typically October, November is when you're going to see a lot of the deadlines. It's going to depend on the deadline. You know, if all of the ones that are of interest to you are in the fall, you're gonna have to really think about that. You know, it might only be realistic to put together 2 or 3 of these. Whereas if you're gonna have some that might be due in the spring, you might be able to spread it out a little bit, but you know, I would look at the process of grant/proposal writing as almost like a 3-credit course of its own, is how I tell students to do it. So you really do have to prioritize. And that's something actually with those spreadsheets that my student had put together, she highlighted the ones that she knew she absolutely wanted to apply for. And then she had like tier 2 opportunities that she would apply for if she was able to make time. Can we take questions?
We sure can.
I am really curious to see what kind of questions we have.
Yeah. I'll let Jen come back up and take the stage and we'll ask some questions for folks again online. Put those questions in the chat. We'll make sure we vocalize them for you. And for folks in the room, feel free to ask. We'd be happy to help y'all.
They're all gonna be about internal funding, Justin. Nobody wants to talk to me. Oh, awesome, you have a question. All right, my day's made.
So, the idea is to still complete our PIs, so they know that we should be.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is about communicating with your advisor while you do this. So
Yes,
a fellowship application is different than a grant application in the sense you're submitting it, right? Like they probably won't even sign off on it, your faculty advisor. Every year I get funny questions when students are working on fellowships, you know, from faculty members who are like, well, where do I sign off on it? I'm like, you don't. This is for the student. You know, it's for you. It goes where you go and you know, funds whatever you happen to be doing, ideally. So it's your work first and foremost, but do you want to be showing this to your advisor? Absolutely, you should, you know, be communicating with them. But ultimately, it needs to be your work. It's not like the process of working on a grant in your research group and submitting it together. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah, but keep your mentors in the loop.
Oh.
Particularly whoever, if you're a PhD student, whoever your dissertation advisor is, or if you're a master's student, whoever your thesis advisor is, if a thesis is
So
required.
involved but not too involved.
Oh, pardon?
So involved but not too involved.
We're right, involved but not too involved. I'm gonna sit down because I'm old and lazy. I'll just face you guys. Other questions? That's a really good one. And I guess, so I said questions, now I'm making a statement, but I've seen advisors get a little too hands-on with their students' work, so I'll see the student's version of it, and then it'll come back into me, and magically it's written as though another person wrote it because another person did start writing it. So remember that ultimately it's your work. Because faculty are typically, in their defense, and we're recording this, they're used to more this grant type situation where it's like you're working on it collaboratively and submitting it as a group. Other questions? Any cyberspace questions? I'm gonna wait out the crickets. I think we can do better than this. We can do better.
Also, another question.
Yeah.
In the writing retreats, you guys will also help us with grammar issues and stuff, since some of us or most of us like to teach.
So, okay, with the writing retreats,
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have strategically located our writing retreat here in the writing center for the mini retreats, so that if you have questions, it'll be easy for us to help connect you with the peer writing coaches out there. Now, you just need to work through their process and potentially deployment or work through that and might have somebody on hand. But we want to follow their process with that, right? Generally, they don't do like drop-offs, like, so you guys like, here's my entire application, can you review this for me and tell me where I'm messed up? But if you have like specific questions, I'm having trouble with this paragraph, or you can say like, I'm having trouble with grammar in this section, can you, or overall can help me review it, and they'll go through and help you with those items, right? And then on the other side of that, we're thinking about like navigating just the process of prepping for a fellowship. We'll try to assist you with that. And so we'll be here now knowing that, again, we're not the experts in your field and area. And so if you come in and you have your application, you're working on it, our expectation would be that you know the award criteria and stuff front to back and know kind of what you're working on, so we can give you more generalized feedback as a third party.
and basically those of us who are here right now are more involved with what I would call proposal development, right? Like I will approach a personal statement versus a research essay. So you don't want me offering grammar tips, basically. And what I don't think too is that it depends on the writing consultant you meet with and kind of their level of comfort, because their biggest thing is addressing structure and organization. And then if they are able, they'll also go into grammar. I think we all have a friend who's a grammar nerd. And so I tell students the very best way, if you need some extra support, find your grammar friend, buy them a coffee, whatever they're beverage, or something that they enjoy, give them your books or gift card. That's typically the best way. And then another thing, read it out loud to yourself. You're going to feel ridiculous, but the sillier you feel, the more effective the exercise is. So like, I was literally sitting in my office earlier, I'm working on this document and I know that Dr. Wilson's going to read it at some point. So like I'm sitting in my office reading it out loud to myself. So that actually really helps me, because I'll have words that are maybe out of place, or if I'm missing some punctuation, or like the language I'm using is repetitive, that helps me quite a bit too. Yeah.
Not to answer your question, but I'll throw out there as a real quick read. It's a fun exercise and can be helpful in helping figure out, are you writing at a level where like an educated like audience understand your research? I did this activity sometimes in presentations where I would ask them to do the 6-word memoir, right? Like, tell me your research in 6 words. Right? It's based off of, I always, every time I read stuff, I always think to myself, I need to remember to look up who originally did the first like 6-word memoir.
I don't even know anymore. Convinced.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Someone was challenged with a 6-word story, you know what I mean, and make it meaningful in 6 words. And their story was for sale, baby shoes never used. Right? You're like, oh wow, I hit me in the field. So like tell me your research in 6 words, right? I've done this activity with like a group, like prepping for like 3-minute thesis competition and stuff like that. We tell them like, you need to be able to have a lay educated audience understand your research. And we've got 7 folks in there, maybe doing cancer research and stuff like that. And they'll give me their 6 words and I'm like, I understood one of those 6 words. I am your educated lay audience. I have a master's degree. I'm a non-STEM. I'm potentially one of the judges. I didn't understand you needed that to me in that 6 word, right? And so, as an exercise, think about sitting down and like, I describe my research in 6 words. What would they be, right? And if the 6 words you pick are incredibly scientific, right? And you're like, if I told these to a peer or mom and dad or no one, they wouldn't know any of those words. That's a good indicator. Maybe you need to look through your research and make sure you're writing at the appropriate level given the grant you're looking for, the fellowship you're looking for, right?
And it varies a lot, and we'll talk about that when we talk about research essays, and we'll, I'm gonna bust out a little, research communication stuff on you. Nothing too intense, but, I won't make you do the one where you have to like sit in a room with somebody and like pitch your research in 30 seconds, cause that's. But we can do, we'll take a look at some others, so. And something that students have told me, so like, the trick is, you want your advisor involved, but your advisor is an expert on the topic, just like you are. And so sometimes what can be really helpful is sort of like grandma, or that, and if they can't understand it, think about how you can make it, the language more accessible. I also think there's a lot of value if you're comfortable in doing so, in showing your personal statement to people who know you and adore you, because chances are you're gonna be overly modest and they'll be able to point out some things that you might have forgotten to bring to the forefront. But I don't know, we're totally giving a preview of the next one.
Yeah,
But
we can-
compare, now all the people come, that'll be great. Yeah. Any other questions?